I want to talk about the insane obsession we have with life as a society and how much harm I think it's doing and how absolutely absurd it is to have not only this attachment to life but this dictation and this conviction of death. I think that a lot of people in our society today, and not only our society, modern society, but throughout many, many generations, hundreds of years ago, going back up to now, have had this moral conviction of death as this almost great evil, as this terrible thing that comes and it ruins the party for everybody. And I think this conviction of death, this separation of life from death and death from life, creates this confusion about what it is we actually are, what we're doing, and what we're actually here for. These are all very, very big questions that have been talked about in philosophies for ages. Today I'm here to give my little bit about it. I think that this desire for us to live forever, this this attachment to life and this conviction of death as the greatest evil, the ender of all of which we know and the ender of all of which we consider to be good, is a complete misunderstanding of this experience of what is now. And it's a complete, I would say, blasphemous is not the right word, but it's a terrible take on what we're here for. If you truly believe that death is evil and that it ruins the party, that it comes and it takes life away from you, then you've completely missed the point. Society's obsession with life will lead to a greedy, gluttonous chokehold on life itself. And we will not be living, but instead we will be walking corpses. And that's all we will be, so long as we separate life from death and we convict one as evil and dictate one as good. Separating life from death, creating this moral boundary, this wall between them, and this idea that life and death are somehow opposites, or there's somehow one is good and the other is evil, creates an attachment, a belief to life, which completely ruins what life actually is. It doesn't just misunderstand life as a whole, it ruins it. I want you to think of life and death as breathing. Breathing is something you do without trying. It's something you do just according to your own nature. You never command yourself to breathe. You never force yourself to breathe. It just happens. And the same is with life and death. Now imagine somebody walked up to you and said, exhaling is the greatest evil. You should only ever inhale. So hold your breath. Now what would happen to you? Well, you'd run out of breath and you'd die. And that's it. my point here is, if you separate life from death, life ceases to exist. Because life can only exist in harmony with death. Life and death are the inhales and exhales that we take on the daily. In order for us to live in this moment, there must be a constant dance between life and death. This constant flux, this movement, almost a sort of music to it. Think about it also as a wave. A wave. Now imagine someone looked at a wave, right? And they'd say, well, the crest, which is the top part, is ultimately the best place to be. The crest is the greatest good, but the trough is the greatest evil. And it is the worst place one can find himself in. It is the worst thing to exist. You cannot separate the crest from the trough. Because if you separate the crest from the trough, the wave ceases to exist. A wave only exists because it comes up to a crest and then it lowers itself to a trough. The same is with the present moment, with life. Life only exists because life comes and death comes. And it's a constant dance, a constant flow. You cannot have life without death. Although this idea has been repeated many times in history, I see today that there's been a lot of talk in society about curing death as though it is some sickness, or finding a cure to every disease known to man. And creating this great society, this sort of utopia where we will live forever and we will do whatever it is we want and we will never have to worry about anything because, well, everything is guaranteed. But that's hell. That's not life. That's not death either. It's a still, it's beyond life and death. It's not eternity. There's nothing to live for in that world. Nobody in the world is capable of living 5,000 years, let alone 5,000 years, let alone 1,000 years or 200 years. There's nothing to do. When you can live forever, everything stops mattering. And at first, you may say, you may come to realization and be like, well, nothing matters. That's great. I can do whatever I want. But then as time would pass, you'd realize, oh, nothing matters. I can do whatever I want. What do I want to do? And even if you figure that out, how long would you be able to do that for? How long would you be able to keep that going for? Not a long time. Because this isn't meant to last forever. This is not meant to be here without an end. As human beings, we're here for a limited time, and that's what creates the beauty of this whole experience. That's what gives us the ability to enjoy the sounds of the birds singing. I don't know if you can hear them, but it's very beautiful. They're singing in the background. That's what can give us the ability to look at the plants and the flowers and the trees and the weather and the clouds and the sky and have a dog and drink some tea and all these wonderful things. It gives us the ability to enjoy them because we know that it is limited. We do not take it for granted. Most people are living in the past and in the future. They're not living in the present. They live in a linear line. They believe themselves to be the middle. They think they are the present, which is the middle, and then there's a linear line which points to the past, and a linear line which points to the future. But future is nothing more than a concept. It does not exist. And past is nothing more than memory. When you're revisiting the past, You're not physically going there. You're not spiritually going there. You're simply playing out the memory of the past in the present moment. It's a present experience. And when you have anxiety, you're simply making up false scenarios, things that do not exist, again in the present moment. The future is a concept, the past is simply memory. So what does that leave us with? Well, past exists only in our minds, so we take away the past. The future exists only in our minds, so we take away the future. Now, what's the present? There is no present, because without a past and a future, there's no present. And therefore, what we are living in is nameless, and that's how it's always supposed to be. There's not supposed to be a name for it. You can only experience it. Saying something, this is the present, you've already lost the point. Putting a label on a present moment is not the point of a present moment. This is it. And a lot of people in our society don't understand. And they therefore hold their breath. And they wonder why they can't breathe, because they're too afraid to exhale. Because somewhere along the lines, they were convinced that to exhale is the greatest evil, that to let go is the greatest evil, that to say goodbye is the greatest evil. But in fact, there is no hello without goodbye. There is no holding on without letting go. There is no exhale without inhale. These things are one and the same. They are only opposites when we make them to be so, when we cut them, when we start playing the game of complication. We say there's a past, there's a present, and there's a future. But there's none of that. There's just, and that's it. There's and nothing else. It doesn't have to be put into words. It's right before you. It's right before you. You need only to experience it. That's it. Stop living in ideas and symbols and actually listen, feel. And that's it. Death is a beautiful thing. Death is one and the same with life. It's like I already said before, it's like a dance. When you start viewing life in this way, when you get this perspective of death and life being one and the same, of nothing being separate, of all being the absolute, you don't need words to explain it anymore. You can just sit and experience it, because that's all you need. And I don't worry often. But today I was watching this show called Love, Death, and Robots, which is what made me start this video in the first place. And I watched this episode called Pop Squad. And for the first time in a very long time, I worried. I was worried because I looked at our society and I looked at our obsession with life, our conviction of death, and this desire to create a cure for death. And I've thought of the hell that would create. I mean, think about it. Think if nobody ever died. Overpopulation would be rampant. We wouldn't even have enough food to sustain ourselves. It's like if a tree never shed its leaves. It would be terrible. It would be, there would be no place for living. We would be walking corpses. And although I do not worry right now, because it's merely a conception of the future, I think that this misunderstanding of death is creating a real sickness in our society. And it is not allowing us to live, to actually live, to stop going into the past and the future and the present. Stop putting all these labels. To just allow things to be exactly as they are. When you give yourself that, I promise you, you will find peace. Not only that, but you will look at the world in a loving manner. Because you will realize you are never alone. Your creation, your very living, is love. And then nothing separates you from your fellow man, nor from any animal that you hear or see, nor any plant that you touch, smell, or see, or any music that you hear. Present, past, future. When all of them disappear, you're left with simply that. You do not need a reasoning mind to understand this. You do not need conceptual thought to understand this. What you need is to put down your thinking mind, your conceptual, your intellectual thought process and your unnecessary constant investigation of things. And simply be. When you open your heart, when you pay attention to your ears and eyes, you realize that the world never asks you anything more than to simply be. Perfection, completeness, stillness, peace, love, truth. All of it is here. As you're listening to me speak, all of it is right here, your very footsteps, at the very sounds you're hearing. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that with this little bit of insight that I have given, this peace of mind that I've shared, you may come to understand that death is not evil and life is not good. These things are not separate. And to strive for immortality is to dig one's own grave.